Good morning, Wendy Murphy. I
Hello.
cannot think of a better person to sit with this morning. How are you? You're very welcome.
Lovely to see you, Eve. Thanks for having me.
So this is day 505 of navigating redundancy, and today is really talking to the leaders and people whose role might be at risk of redundancy, because we know one of the most difficult things is having the conversation initially to put that person's role at risk. And I know you and I work together, and you have this incredible ability to talk to people in a very compassionate, empathetic way. And I'm guessing it's from all of your years in HR, so significant amount of years in HR at a very senior level. And then you pivoted into the sales arena, or the commercial arena is probably a better way of putting it. And you've got that incredible blend of the two skills and capabilities at this stage. So no one better to talk to this conversation this morning. So thanks again.
You are very welcome. I suppose let me start with saying that oftentimes it feels very personal when it comes to redundancy, both for the leader involved and more importantly for the person that is impacted. But it's not personal. These are business decisions that a company has to make, often laboring over it for quite some time in the background, long before anything is ever communicated, to try and ensure the longevity of that company and that they continue to make profits, deliver their solutions or their products to the customers, and stay alive essentially. And so that's the first thing I would say, is just don't take all of this personally, even though it's very hard not to, because this is your life, and we often attach our own identity with our work identity.
Right.
And that's a really, really challenging thing. I mean, I even had to make myself redundant at one point in time, which was even more challenging than a standard redundancy. So I speak from experience. And so what I would say first and foremost to the leaders in question is, yes, there is a process that has to be followed, and often times we're given a script. And to all of us that are involved, whether that is the person impacted or the leader, you have to know that legally there are certain things that have to be said in order for that company to be compliant with law. And so that is a must. Nevertheless, you can say that with tonality that is compassionate and softer and shows empathy. And for those of us that are leaders walking into that room, knowing that this is probably going to floor the person that's sitting in front of you, just thinking about how you would feel in that seat. So me having gone through redundancy before has given me a perspective that I didn't have previously, because now I really know like how traumatized I was by that conversation, how difficult it is. Actually, that communication is only the start of it. That instance where you're told you're being put at risk is really only the tip of the iceberg of the journey you have to go on, the emotions that come with that, and all of the activities that you have to put in place in order for you to come out the other side as a whole person.
I love that. And you're so right. It's not that the process isn't followed or the legalities aren't adhered to, but the tonality around how you share the message. You probably know that person. You've worked with that person for X amount of days, weeks, years, whatever it might be. You don't have to turn into this mechanical version of you. You can show the warmth and the empathy, and then still have that really difficult conversation. And I have
Yeah.
to say, I think it's one of your key skill sets to be able to do that. So,
Thank
just on a
you.
bit
Thank
of
you.
girly appreciation here.
Thank you, but it doesn't even have to be much. I remember in very early in my HR training being told never touch somebody when you're giving them bad news. And I was kind of trying to internalize that. I thought, well, why? Because my natural self would be I would want to hug somebody at the end of, giving them.
Right.
And so, and I learned as an HR professional not to do that, obviously. But I think you can do that. You can make somebody feel like they've had a warm hug, or that you have touched them even when you haven't, by virtue of how you say it, your facial expressions, the proximity by which you're having the conversation. That has become a little bit more challenging with digital, conversations where a lot of people are working remotely. But I still think you can do it by virtue of leaning in and the expressions on your face, and pausing at the right times, giving the person on the other side of the table space to internalize what you've said, and asking them the questions that they probably can't even get out of their own mouths right now, which is, are there any questions? Did you understand what I just explained? Watching their reaction and saying, let me just walk you through it again.
Mm.
Let's go through it step by step again. Sometimes I've had to do that 3 or 4 times with a person because I can see they're blanking. They're just like, I can't even understand why I'm here in this room having this
Yes.
conversation with you. I
Because your
thought I
brain goes
was
into fight or flight mode, so you can't possibly
exactly.
process or even take in much of the conversation from there. So
Yeah,
the manager
exactly.
recognizing that and pausing, as you say, and repeating where necessary.
Yeah. So I think there's a bit of a format that you learn over time. But I do feel very strongly that we have to treat people with dignity and respect on day one when they're hired and when they leave, whether that is through redundancy or resignation or any other mechanism by which somebody leaves the company. That is really important.
Totally, because you never know where that person's going to show up again. They could be your boss at a future point in time, a
Exactly.
partner, a client. So even if, naturally we'd hope people would humanly want to show up like that, but it's also recognizing there could be a business element to it as well, I guess. If you don't mind, we're just going to move to, so I'm the person, I'm hearing the news. I've
Mm-hmm.
never been put at risk redundancy before. My role has never been made redundant. How do I kind of digest what's happening and familiarize myself with the process enough so that I feel like there's an element of control there, for want of a better term? What's your view on that, Wendy?
So I think in the first instance, it's about whoever is communicating the action to you to get as many of the facts out of them as possible. And I would encourage you to ask for that in writing. Because as
Mm,
you say, in that moment, you are in fight or flight, your brain is on heightened alert, your emotions start to rise, you straight away start planning through your head, oh my God, what's going to happen? And I'm worried about money and my family and my identity and what are people going to say? Because there's still,
right.
unfortunately, a stigma around redundancies, regardless of the fact that they've been happening forever and a day.
Yeah.
So first step is ask questions if you can. If you
Mm,
can, the one question that you ask is, can you please provide to me everything that you've said in writing so that I can have time to digest it? So that's
brilliant.
the first thing. Secondly is if you're in a mid to large size organization, a lot of those companies have what we call an EAP service. So that's an
Mm,
employee assistance program. And
love.
that is usually where you get up to 6 and some companies 8 calls free of charge where you can have a conversation with a legal representative, a financial expert, a therapist, somebody in the well-being space. There's a wide variety that you can engage with, and it's free of charge on the company's money. So leverage that opportunity to ask the questions you didn't think of in the moment with the
Mm,
HR person or with your manager. The next is for those people that are not in those companies that have that facility, go to the Citizens Advice Bureau. They are super individuals. They have a wealth of knowledge around what you're entitled to, what are some of the impacts that you haven't even thought of, particularly things like taxation.
mm,
How is this going to be handled if you get this lump sum? What's going to happen to your healthcare? What's going to happen to your pension? And these are quite emotive areas because
mm,
your health and your future in terms of your pension are really important to people. So just
right.
understanding what's going to happen to them, what you're entitled to, so then you can go back and ask your employer those questions. So for me, it's around gathering as many facts as you can to answer all the millions of questions that are going on in your mind over that first couple of hours and days.
Totally. And the data suggests the first kind of challenge for people is around the financial piece, that financial security. And we
Yeah.
spoke to Conor Byrne yesterday from fairstone.ie, and he gave incredible advices. Go and get some financial advice fairly quickly. People like them are free. Like, I love the AP. I hadn't even thought of that, Wendy, till you mentioned it. That's free there. Just to prompt some of the thinking around taxation and then my pension and how do I make the money stretch until I secure another role or want to go forward with another role. So I
Yeah.
love that you're covering that. Thank you. Spot on.
And just one thing, just going back to the first question, Eve, that I just sprang into my mind is when you're put at risk, that doesn't mean that you're actually going to be made redundant. And I think that's really important to know because in some organizations, by virtue of the fact that the law is constructed in the way it is, we have to communicate to the full organization that you are being made put at risk. But actually, only a portion of those people may exit the business.
Mm,
So, don't always assume the worst.
right.
You have to plan for the worst, but it may not happen.
I guess if there's a process and you're going through a natural consultation and
Correct.
depending on the size of the business, etc., I think that's a really fair point. When we might just move forward to the branding piece, because we know we've talked to all week around the initial reaction, how you might feel. We've even mentioned it this morning. There's different emotions that you're going to go through, and each person is going to react differently, probably. But you find yourself in a situation now where maybe you are going through the consultation or your role's already at risk and you're planning your next move, but you might still be in the business. You could be still in the business for a week, 4 weeks, 4 months in some cases, maybe even longer. I'd
Yeah.
love for you to talk to the personal brand piece because, some people are not going to be happy that this happened to them. As you say, it might feel very personal. They might not want to show up as the best version of themselves or be able to show up as the best version of themselves because of how they're reacting, very typically sometimes and very naturally sometimes to the situation. But it's still really important that you show up as, a form of your best self that you're capable of doing. Could you maybe talk to how someone might manage that in a challenging situation?
So I know the audience that you want to speak to here is people that have been impacted by redundancy, but I would just encourage anyone that's watching this is to take your personal brand really seriously.
Love it.
Your network and how you're perceived is really important in this context of if you were made redundant, because
Mm,
it is through your network you're most likely to get your next job.
mm,
So that network starts in the company that you're in today, right? Or indeed prior companies that you worked in. And
right.
so if you are impacted, and this is very hard in the first 24 hours, but the next day when you've had a little bit of sleep, I would say straight away start engaging conversations with people outside of your immediate team in the organization. Having conversations around, I have been put at risk. I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be, but I need to start thinking about other avenues to explore in the company. What open roles are available? So first and foremost, talent acquisition is the place to go and ask questions. If you have an internal talent marketplace or you have an internal mobility website or a portal that you go there, see what jobs are available internally, because you can still apply whilst you're employed and you
Right.
could potentially end up staying in that company. When you're having those conversations or those coffee chats, and I would encourage you to have lots of coffee chats with lots of people, you're right. It's in that moment, it's how you show up. So being bitter because you have been put at risk is not something that I would, encourage anyone to do.
Mm,
And I've seen, unfortunately, time and time again, where people are so emotional and anger is the first place that they go on that change management curve. And I heard you talking to Brendan earlier in the week about that
yeah.
management curve. Often people go with that anger first and then into frustration. And when you show up with that in an opportunity to get another job, unfortunately, you're not going to get that job.
Right.
And so really taking stock of your emotions
Mm,
and being conscious that every conversation you have to show up with the best light. So
right.
it's, look, I am where I am. I'm going through the process, but I haven't changed. My work output, how I deliver, how I think about work, my capabilities, my skills, and my experiences haven't changed. And I have lots to contribute here.
Mm,
And I actually think it would be remiss of the company not to give me these opportunities to have these conversations and give me,
right.
a potential to continue to contribute here. If this is a company that you want to stay in, right? Some
Right.
people
That's the key, isn't it?
don't
Some
want to
people
stay there,
might
right?
be skirting left, right?
Yeah,
Get out of
exactly.
here.
But even in the external conversations, it's the same thing. I was actually talking to a friend of mine recently who's going through an interviewing process. And the recruiter actually said to him, I'm delighted to hear how positively you speak of your prior employer. He had been made redundant.
Right.
And he was like quite surprised by that. And the recruiter said, well, you would be surprised the amount of people that show up here very angry, bitter, and say some really inappropriate things about their prior employer.
Mm,
You've seen it, I've seen it. We've both interviewed for many years in our careers. And unfortunately, that is a reality. But
mm,
that will not get you the job that you want. And your primary focus needs to be on securing financial gain. So
mm.
getting employment so that you have that security of the money coming in to pay your bills, your mortgages, etc. So even though it's going to kill you inside, really think about what you say, how you show up, and make sure that you pause before you have the conversation to get yourself as we call in the business, primed. So
Yeah.
you're primed to have the right conversation, which hopefully will lead to the right outcome. So,
Totally, Wendy. And so, to your point, I think it's hold off having the conversation until you can manage yourself and your emotions in that moment. Like
yeah,
you say, you might be angry, upset, frustrated, and perfectly entitled to all of those. However, you don't bring
100%.
that energy into your networking conversations or your interviews or any of the rest of it. So, it's really about managing self and your emotions first and foremost. And we did have a conversation with the wellness expert and with Brendan earlier in the week to try and help for that to happen and to move out of that phase of the anger, frustration, and upset, as soon as you can. And then
And
bring your energy of, I'm primed, I'm ready, let's go, let me find my next play if that's what I want to do.
And sometimes you just can't do that yourself. Like when you're in the moment, it's very hard to detach from, why is
Yeah.
this happening to me? This is so unfair. I'm a really good performer. Like, how am I even on this list?
Right.
And so what I would encourage you is if you are naturally somebody that goes to a negative place and you start to be very critical, get somebody else to help you, whether
Mm.
that's a friend, a family member, another colleague, or if you have some funds at all, a coach.
Mm.
Somebody who has an outside perspective and can tell you how you're showing up, even with them.
Love
And
it.
because more likely in a comfortable moment, you'll be even worse. That anger will really come to the surface.
Yeah.
And just having that, outside view in would be very helpful.
Brilliant. I know Brendan spoke about his board of directors, and I know you have one as well. And they're
Yes.
the kind of people you go to. So who can I voice off to and, share my frustration and anger with, get it off my chest, so to speak, so I can come back and bring the energy that I need to bring. So it's not denying your emotions. Absolutely not. That's the opposite of what we're saying. It's feel them in the right place with the right people and then bring the energy to the right place to the right person when you're trying to network and secure your next role and how you move forward.
I also think it's really important, Eve, to like be very, very pragmatic about who you are, what you do, and what you can deliver. So,
Mm.
what are the skills that you have? What are the experience that you've had? What has been the impact that you've had on your existing company and on prior companies? And even just going onto your LinkedIn profile or looking at your CV and reminding yourself of all the good things that you have done in your career, because in a dark moment when you've just been made redundant, oftentimes your head goes to a place of, oh my God, I must be really bad, or I'm
Mm.
not good enough. How am I going to get a job? The market's not great right now. Why would they pick me over somebody else?
Mhm.
There's probably going to be 100 people in a process. Why would they pick me?
Right.
These are the kind of thoughts that are going through your head. Just reminding yourself of how good you are and the value that you can bring is a great starting point.
Oh my God, totally. And so, so important. And I think as well, Wendy, we were talking through the week and we even inferred it today is around the loss of control around the situation. It is what it is. I have no control over it. But actually, what you have complete control over is your reaction, your response, and how you show up. And so that personal brand is completely within your control in this situation. And I heard
Yeah.
something just during the week coincidentally, and they were like, if you don't manage your brand, it's getting managed for you.
Yes.
You have a
Yeah.
brand whether or not you're proactively managing it. So why not proactively turn your attention to this and make it something great and turn something that can be really difficult and challenging into something that, can be quite positive and something proud to walk away with.
So let me just to close out, give some very practical steps of how to create a brand for yourself, because some people hear this and go like, what is it? What should I do?
Brilliant.
So in the first instance, list out who are all the people in the company that can influence your career. Rank them from 1 to 5. 5 being those that can have the largest amount of influence and 1 the least.
Love it.
Then depending on that ranking, you articulate a different narrative. So the people that can influence your career with the largest capacity, you have a very clear narrative around what I want, where I want to go, what I can contribute, and what can you do for me. And you alter your communication depending on that person. If you've never had a conversation with this person in your life before, it's very difficult to do that in the moment where you've just been made redundant, but you still have to do it.
Mm.
So reach out regardless, but be very clear on the ask, because this
Mm.
person is giving up their time to have a conversation with you.
Very
In
good.
an ideal situation where it would be outside of redundancy, you will be bringing some value to the conversation. But in this instance, it's less about what you can bring, but more actually it's an ask. And so just be very clear on the ask and the timelines.
Brilliant.
The next thing is that narrative. You need to get really crisp around what you are bringing to the table. And I would encourage you to write that down in a paragraph. For those of you that like AI, get help with AI and it can help script it for you. And then practice that narrative. You know, in the old days, you would say your elevator pitch. You know, what would you say to somebody in the elevator? It's almost the same thing in these coffee chats. You know, practice, practice, practice. Because actually, what I found when I was made redundant was the narrative that I was telling myself wasn't the one that I should have been telling externally.
Right.
So I went to a place of I lost confidence, and that came through in my narrative. And it wasn't until I practiced it out loud with a friend of mine, and she said, "That's not you. That's not what you do."
Amazing.
And she helped me rewrite the paragraph, which nailed it. So first and foremost, the stakeholder map, as I call it, list out all of the stakeholders. Then it is get your narrative crisp. Then it is start putting all of those coffee chats in the calendars. And I will be doing the same externally. So don't leave anything to chance, parallel process so that you have maximized your opportunity to get employment.
Absolutely amazing. Drop the mic. Love that we're finishing out on this one today. So grateful for your time, Wendy.
Lovely, lovely to spend time with you. And I really wish everybody well. It's a very tough thing to be made redundant, but no, this is not going to define you. This is just a moment in time. You were fantastic before, you will be fantastic after. And wishing everybody a great time over the festive holidays.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.